In the spring of 2004, in the corridors of Fox Broadcasting Company's headquarters in Los Angeles, a decision was being made that would reshape the landscape of television drama. It was a gamble, the kind that separates the cautious from the visionary. The network executives gathered around a conference table, held in their hands a pilot script unlike anything they had commissioned before. It was finite. It was impossible. It was perfect. Consider for a moment what it means to sell a television series. The industry runs on sustainability, on stories that can stretch across years, spinning infinite variations on established formulas. Medical dramas heal patients. Police procedurals solve crimes. Family sitcoms navigate domestic chaos. Week after week, season after season, the machine churns forward. But here was something different. Here was a writer named Paul Scheuring proposing the impossible, a serialized drama with a built-in expiration date. One season, one prison, one escape. And then, if the premise held true, nothing. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Scheuring understood something fundamental about storytelling that the television industry had forgotten in its pursuit of perpetual content. He understood that endings give meaning to beginnings, that constraint breeds creativity, that audiences hunger for narrative completion in an age of endless sequels and spin-offs. He walked into that pitch meeting not with a franchise, but with a complete novel adapted for the screen. 13 episodes, he told them. Maybe 22 if they believed in it. And then the story would be over. The hero would escape, or he would fail. And either way, resolution would arrive. The network executives listened. They calculated, they weighed the risk of investing millions in a show designed to self-destruct against the potential reward of creating something audiences had never seen before. In that room, competing visions of television's future collided. One path led toward safety, toward procedurals that could run for decades. The other led into uncharted territory. They chose the territory, but choosing to move forward and actually building something revolutionary are separated by an ocean of decisions, each one carrying the weight of success or failure. The first challenge was deceptively simple. Who would embody this impossible story? Casting directors Sasha Alpert and Jennifer Houston faced a unique puzzle. They needed actors who could anchor a serialized drama, performers capable of sustaining complex character arcs across months of storytelling. But the budget, always the budget, demanded efficiency. Established stars commanded salaries that would consume resources needed elsewhere. Unknown actors offered affordability but carried risk. The solution required strategic thinking. Imagine the delicate balance they struck. For Michael Scofield, the brilliant structural engineer who would tattoo a prison's blueprints across his body and commit a crime to save his brother, they found Wentworth Miller. He was not a household name. He had appeared in guest roles, in small parts, accumulating craft without commanding star wages. But when he auditioned, when he inhabited that particular combination of genius and desperation, of mathematical precision and emotional depth, something crystallized. Here was Michael Scofield. Here was the still center around which chaos would orbit. For Lincoln Burrows, the condemned man whose execution would drive every desperate choice, they chose Dominic Purcell. Physically imposing, capable of projecting both menace and vulnerability, Purcell brought gravitas without astronomical cost. The chemistry between Miller and Purcell, that ineffable quality that cannot be manufactured or predicted, emerged immediately. They were brothers. The audience would believe it. Around these two, the casting team assembled a constellation of talent. Amaury Nolasco as Fernando Sucre, Michael's cellmate, and unexpected ally. Robert Knepper as Theodore Bagwell, known as T-Bag. A performance so chilling it would become iconic. Wade Williams as Captain Brad Bellick, the corrupt guard whose petty tyranny masked deeper insecurities. Robin Tunney as Veronica Donovan, anchoring the external investigation, and crucially, Peter Stormare as John Abruzzi, bringing European gravitas to the mob boss who would become essential to the escape plan. But two casting decisions elevated the entire enterprise. For Warden Henry Pope, the principled leader caught between duty and decency, they secured Stacy Keach, a veteran actor whose presence lent credibility to every scene. And for Agent Paul Kellerman, the government operative who would embody the conspiracy's ruthless efficiency, Paul Adelstein brought an understated menace that would haunt the series. Each choice was strategic, each salary negotiated to preserve resources for what came next, the prison itself. In Joliet, Illinois, southwest of Chicago, stands a structure that had witnessed nearly 150 years of American incarceration. The Joliet Correctional Center, opened in 1868, had housed generations of prisoners before closing its doors in 2002. Its limestone walls, 3 feet thick, rose with Victorian solemnity. Its cell blocks stretched in geometric precision. Its history soaked into every corridor, every barred window, every echo of footsteps on stone floors. When the Prison Break production team first walked through those abandoned halls, they recognized something vital. Authenticity cannot be built on a soundstage. The decision to film at Joliet was expensive. Transporting cast and crew, managing a historic site, working within the constraints of an actual prison architecture rather than designer-friendly sets. All of it added complexity and cost. But what they gained was immeasurable. When viewers watched the pilot episode, when they saw Michael Scofield first enter Fox River Penitentiary, they were seeing real walls, real bars, real shadows, cast by real Illinois sunlight through real prison windows. The atmosphere it created was not merely authentic, it was haunting. The production split its resources carefully. Joliet provided exteriors and key interior locations. Studio sets in Chicago built the more frequently used spaces where week after week filming could proceed without the complications of a historic location. It was a hybrid approach, maximizing impact while managing logistics. Every dollar was allocated with purpose. Every choice served the larger strategy. With locations secured and actors cast, attention turned to the most crucial element of all, the pilot episode itself. In television, the pilot is both audition and foundation. It must introduce a world, establish characters, set tone, promise future developments, and do all of this while functioning as a complete, satisfying hour of entertainment. Many pilots fail at this balance. They spend so much energy on setup that they forget to be compelling. They explain when they should seduce. Paul Shoring's pilot script, refined through development, directed by Brett Ratner with cinematic scope, accomplished something remarkable. It began with the ending. Michael Scofield, dressed in a fine suit, walks into a bank. He pulls out a gun. He commits robbery. He waits calmly for the police to arrive. He is arrested, processed, sentenced, and delivered into Fox River Penitentiary. And only then, only after we have watched this brilliant man deliberately destroy his life, does the camera reveal what has been hidden in plain sight. His body is a canvas, covered in an intricate tattoo that appears at first glance to be merely ornate design, but is in fact a map, a blueprint, a plan so audacious it defies belief. The revelation is perfect. In one moment, everything we have watched transforms. This is not a story of crime and punishment. This is a story of calculated sacrifice. Michael Scofield has committed a crime not out of desperation or greed or passion, but as the first move in an elaborate chess game designed to achieve the impossible, breaking his brother out of prison before execution. That single revelation promised audiences something television rarely delivered, a story with purpose, with direction, with an actual destination rather than infinite wheel spinning. From that moment, viewers were no longer passive observers. They were co-conspirators, eager to see how each piece of the plan would unfold. The pilot efficiently introduced the conspiracy that framed Lincoln Burrows for murder. President Caroline Reynolds' brother, Terence Steadman, supposedly dead, actually alive, hidden by a shadowy organization called the Company that manipulated events at the highest levels of government. It introduced the personal stakes. Veronica Donovan investigating, determined to prove Lincoln's innocence. It established the ticking clock, execution date approaching, time running out, every day bringing death closer. And it populated Fox River with a rogues gallery of inmates, each with their own motivations, each potentially useful or dangerous to Michael's plan. Within 45 minutes of screen time, the pilot established 8 major characters, introduced a conspiracy, revealed a master plan, created multiple conflicts, and made viewers desperate to see what happened next. That is craftsmanship. That is strategy executed at the highest level. But creating a brilliant pilot is only the beginning. The real gamble was still ahead, convincing audiences to watch. Fox Broadcasting faced a crucial decision about scheduling. Television premieres traditionally cluster around September, the start of the new season when viewers are primed to sample new shows. Summer was considered television's wasteland, a dead zone where networks burned off failed programs and aired reruns. But the conventional wisdom that summer meant death was beginning to crack. Shows like The O.C. had demonstrated that younger audiences, the demographic that drove cultural conversation and advertiser interest, did not abandon television during warm weather. They simply needed compelling reasons to watch. Prison Break premiered on Monday, August 29, 2005. It was a calculated risk. The late summer slot meant reduced competition, a clear path to audience attention without battling a dozen other premieres. But it also meant challenging expectations, asking viewers to commit to a serialized drama when their minds were still on vacation, literally and figuratively. The marketing campaign was surgical in its targeting. Fox aimed primarily at men aged 18 to 34, the notoriously difficult demographic that advertisers craved but struggled to capture. The show's premise, a structural engineer using intelligence rather than violence, though violence was certainly present, appealed to audiences hungry for smart protagonists. The conspiracy elements attracted viewers raised on The X-Files. The serialized structure appealed to those who loved puzzle box narratives. But the marketing did not stop at narrow targeting. While men were the primary focus, the campaign also emphasized the emotional core. A brother's love, the sacrifice Michael was making, the impossible odds against innocent people trapped in corrupt systems. This wider appeal would prove crucial. Prison Break attracted female viewers in significant numbers, drawn by the character development and emotional stakes that elevated the show beyond simple action thriller. The premiere delivered. 6.5 million viewers tuned in that August night. For a summer debut, the number was spectacular. But more important than raw viewership was retention. How many would return for episode 2? Television history is littered with promising pilots, followed by audience erosion. The second episode drop-off is where many shows die. Grew. Word of mouth, that most precious of marketing forces, began to spread. Viewers told friends. Online forums emerged where fans dissected each episode, analyzing Michael's plan, predicting future developments, celebrating the intricate plotting. This was 2005, the early days of social media's power. MySpace was dominant, Facebook was emerging, YouTube was brand new. But digital conversation was already reshaping how shows found their audiences. Prison Break became a show people talked about, and talk, as any network executive knows, translates to viewers. The creative team understood that sustaining audience investment required meticulous strategy. Every episode ended with a cliffhanger, not cheap manipulation but genuine advancement of plot that left crucial questions unanswered. Would Michael obtain the chemical he needed to deteriorate concrete? Would Bellick discover the hole behind Michael's cell toilet? Would the company eliminate Veronica before she uncovered the truth? Each question demanded that viewers return. But cliffhangers alone do not sustain serialized drama. The audience must care about the answers, which means they must care about the characters. Prison Break succeeded because beneath the elaborate escape plan beat a human heart. Michael's relationship with his brother, his growing closeness to Dr. Sara Tancredi, the prison doctor who represented hope and normalcy in that brutal place, Sucre's desperate desire to reunite with his pregnant girlfriend Maricruz, C-Note's struggle to provide for his daughter. These emotional threads wove through the plot mechanics, giving viewers reasons to invest beyond mere curiosity about whether the escape would succeed. As the first season progressed, the ratings stabilized, then grew. By November, the show was averaging 7 million viewers. It had become a hit. By summer standards, a phenomenon. But success brought its own challenge, one that Paul Shoring had anticipated from the beginning. What happens when the story ends? The original vision was clear. One season, one escape, complete story. Michael would break Lincoln out of Fox River, or he would fail, and either way, the premise would be exhausted. You cannot make a television series called Prison Break about people who have already broken out of prison, or can you? Fox Broadcasting had invested in a hit. The show was making money, attracting demographics they needed, building cultural momentum. The network had no intention of ending it after one season. The pressure to extend the story was immense, and so the creative team faced a dilemma that would define the rest of the series. How do you continue a story designed to be finite? The decision they made was both pragmatic and risky. The escape would succeed. That promise to the audience had to be kept. But the escape would not be the end. It would be the end of the beginning. The breakout would occur in the season 1 finale, delivering cathartic victory after 22 episodes of mounting tension. But freedom would be fleeting. The conspirators would become fugitives. The company would hunt them. New prisons, literal and metaphorical, would emerge. It was a strategy built on transformation rather than repetition. Prison Break would break its own premise to survive, gambling that audiences loved these characters enough to follow them beyond the walls of Fox River Penitentiary. The gamble would define everything that followed. The show would run for 4 seasons initially, then return 5 years later for a 5th season reunion. It would take its characters from Fox River to Panama to Yemen. It would expand conspiracies, introduce new antagonists, kill beloved characters, and resurrect dead ones. It would frustrate some fans and delight others. It would never quite recapture the perfect, focused intensity of that first season, when everything was in service of a single, impossible goal. But none of that diminishes what was accomplished in those early strategic decisions. Fox Broadcasting took a risk on a finite story. Paul Shoring crafted a premise that respected audience intelligence. The casting directors assembled a constellation of talent that exceeded the sum of its parts. The production team created authenticity through location and design. The pilot episode delivered a perfect promise. The marketing found its audience. And the storytelling, week after week, rewarded viewer investment with plot advancement, character development, and the rare pleasure of a narrative that knew where it was going. In the vast landscape of television, where so many shows drift without purpose, recycling formulas and hoping for the best, Prison Break began with something precious. A blueprint. Not just Michael Schofield's tattooed map of Fox River Penitentiary, but a creative and strategic blueprint for how to build event television in an era when audiences were beginning to demand more than episodic repetition. The walls of Fox River were not the only barriers being broken. The conventions of television drama were being challenged, and in that challenge, something remarkable was being born. Within every confined space, whether a coral reef or a prison cell block, a hierarchy emerges. It is an inevitable consequence of limited resources and competing needs. The strong dominate, the clever adapt, the weak submit or perish. Fox River Penitentiary, for all its concrete and steel, its guards and regulations, was no different from any other ecosystem. Power flowed through its corridors like water finding channels, pooling in certain locations, controlled by certain individuals who understood the fundamental truth. Authority on paper means nothing without the ability to enforce it. At the apex of the official hierarchy sat Warden Henry Pope, a man who carried the weight of institution with visible gravity. Consider his position for a moment. He was not a cruel man. He was not corrupt in the manner of those beneath him. He believed, genuinely believed, in rehabilitation, in the possibility that even those who had committed terrible acts might find redemption within his walls. He ran programs. He offered education. He maintained the prison industry, where inmates could learn trades, earn small wages, develop skills that might serve them after release. But belief and reality are often separated by an unbridgeable gulf. Pope's power was constrained by forces above and below. Above him sat political appointees, budget committees, a criminal justice system that valued punishment over reform. Every decision he made was scrutinized, questioned, subjected to the grinding machinery of bureaucracy. And below him, within the population of Fox River, other powers had emerged, shadow governments that operated by rules he could never fully control. His personal tragedy deepened the portrait. Pope's wife had died of cancer, leaving him with memories he tried to preserve through an elaborate model of the Taj Mahal. He was constructing piece by painstaking piece. It was a monument to lost love, a tangible manifestation of grief and devotion. When Michael Scofield offered to help with the project, demonstrating knowledge of structural engineering and architectural history, a bond formed between prisoner and warden that would complicate everything that followed. Pope wanted to believe in Michael. He wanted to believe that this intelligent, soft-spoken man was different from the others, and that belief, that human need to see redemption where perhaps only strategy existed, would be exploited with surgical precision. Below Pope in the official hierarchy, but wielding far more immediate power over daily existence, stood Captain Brad Bellick. If Pope represented the idealistic vision of the penal system, Bellick embodied its corrupt reality. He was not a complex man. His motivations were transparent: control, profit, and the petty satisfaction of dominating those who could not fight back. Bellick's power derived from his willingness to abuse his position. He controlled the flow of contraband into Fox River, the cigarettes and magazines and small comforts that made incarceration marginally more bearable. Inmates paid him, with money funneled from outside or favors rendered within. He overlooked violations for those who cooperated, and he punished ruthlessly those who challenged him. His domain was the guard force, and through them he extended his reach into every corner of the prison. But Bellick was also a coward, and cowards are predictable. His need for dominance masked deep insecurity. He compensated for his inadequacies through bullying, never realizing that true power does not require constant demonstration. Michael Scofield understood this immediately. Bellick was not an insurmountable obstacle. He was a variable to be managed, his predictable responses incorporated into the larger plan. The prison industry offered Bellick another avenue for control and profit. Inmates who worked in prison industry, manufacturing license plates, furniture, doing laundry, had access to tools, materials, and freedom of movement within certain zones. Assignment to prison industry was therefore valuable, and value creates markets. Bellick sold assignments. He revoked them as punishment. He used the system as both carrot and stick, never imagining that his corruption was creating the very openings that Michael's escape plan required. Within the inmate population itself, power had consolidated around certain individuals, each representing different forms of influence. The most immediately dangerous was John Abruzzi, mob boss, murderer, a man whose criminal empire extended far beyond Fox River's walls. In the ecosystem of prison, Abruzzi was an apex predator. Other inmates gave him space, showed him respect, understood that disrespecting John Abruzzi meant consequences that extended to family members on the outside. Abruzzi's power was based on external connections. He could order actions in the wider world from his cell. He had money, lawyers, associates, who remained loyal despite his incarceration. This made him valuable to Michael's plan, but also extraordinarily dangerous. Abruzzi was not a man to be manipulated easily. He was intelligent, paranoid, quick to violence. Convincing him to join the escape required offering something he desperately wanted: the location of Fibonacci, the witness whose testimony had put him in Fox River. Michael possessed this information because he had planned for this moment long before entering prison. He had researched Abruzzi's case, located Fibonacci, and held that information as leverage. But leverage is only effective if the other party believes you will actually deliver. Michael walked a razor's edge with Abruzzi, revealing just enough to maintain credibility, while withholding enough to ensure his own survival. One miscalculation, one moment where Abruzzi doubted Michael's usefulness, and the plan would end with Michael's throat cut in a dark corridor. The racial dynamics within Fox River added another layer of complexity. Prisons are often informally segregated, with different racial groups controlling different territories and supporting their members. Michael, white and obviously educated, was an anomaly. He did not fit the typical categories. This worked both for and against him. He was not automatically affiliated with any particular group, which meant he could potentially negotiate with all of them. But it also meant he lacked the automatic protection that gang membership might provide. C-Note: Charles Westmoreland's African-American cellmate represented military intelligence and strategic thinking. Before his court-martial and imprisonment, C-Note had served in the army, gaining skills in intelligence gathering and operational planning. He ended up in Fox River after attempting to secure medical treatment for his daughter through illegal means. His desperation made him useful to Michael, but also unpredictable. C-Note's military background meant he understood tactics, could recognize when he was being played, and possessed skills that could either help or hinder the escape. When C-Note discovered evidence of Michael's plan, he did not go to the authorities. He went to Michael. He blackmailed his way into the conspiracy, demanding inclusion or threatening exposure. It was a calculated risk on C-Note's part, gambling that Michael would accept another conspirator rather than risk everything being revealed. The gamble paid off, but it fundamentally changed the dynamics of the escape. Every additional person increased complexity and risk. Every additional motivation had to be accounted for and managed. Fernando Sucre occupied a unique position in Michael's strategy. As Michael's cellmate, Sucre had access to information and opportunities that others lacked. But more importantly, Sucre was not hardened. He was not a violent criminal or career convict. He had committed a crime of passion, held up a liquor store to get money for his girlfriend Mara Cruz, and ended up with a 5-year sentence that destroyed his life. Sucre's motivation was pure and simple. He wanted to get back to Mara Cruz before she married someone else. This singular focus made him both reliable and vulnerable. Michael could trust Sucre's loyalty because Sucre's goals aligned completely with the escape plan. But Sucre's emotional desperation also created liability. He was not strategic. He was not calculating. He was a good man in a terrible situation, which made him capable of both sacrifice and catastrophic mistakes driven by feeling rather than logic. The alliance between Michael and Sucre became the emotional heart of the escape plan. They were cellmates who became friends, conspirators who became brothers. Sucre's loyalty never wavered, even when the plan seemed impossible, even when continuing forward meant risking everything. In the brutal environment of Fox River, where trust was currency and betrayal was epidemic, their friendship represented something rare, genuine human connection untainted by strategic calculation. And then there was Theodore Bagwell, known universally as T-Bag, the most disturbing presence in Fox River. T-Bag was a convicted paedophile and murderer, a man whose depravity was matched only by his cunning and survival instinct. He was despised by guards and inmates alike, occupying the lowest rung of the prison hierarchy. In any just world, he would have been excluded from the escape plan entirely. But justice and necessity are often incompatible. T-Bag discovered the escape plan by accident, noticing the hole Michael was creating behind his cell toilet. Rather than reporting it, T-Bag saw opportunity. He blackmailed his way into the conspiracy using the same tactic C-Note had employed: join or be exposed. Michael was forced to accept him, knowing that T-Bag's inclusion represented a moral compromise that would haunt them all. But the calculation was brutally simple. Exposing T-Bag meant exposing the entire plan. The escape required accepting a monster as an ally. T-Bag's presence created constant tension within the group. No one trusted him. No one wanted him there. But he possessed certain advantages. He was adaptable, ruthless, willing to do things others would not. In the harsh calculus of escape, these qualities had value, however much they turned the stomach to acknowledge. Charles Westmoreland, the oldest inmate involved in the escape, claimed to be D.B. Cooper, the famous hijacker who parachuted from a commercial airplane with $200,000 in ransom money and was never caught. Whether this was true remained ambiguous, but the legend gave Westmoreland a certain mystique. More importantly, he had been in prison for decades, understood its rhythms and patterns, and possessed the patience that comes with age. Westmoreland's motivation for joining the escape was sentimental. Wanted to see his daughter before he died, wanted to reunite with the family he had abandoned decades ago. His advanced age made him a physical liability, but his knowledge of the prison system proved invaluable. He knew how guards rotated shifts, where cameras had blind spots, which administrators were corrupt and which were honest. This institutional knowledge, accumulated over years of observation, filled gaps in Michael's blueprint. David Opolskis, known as Tweener, represented youthful opportunism. He was a low-level criminal, immature and easily manipulated, who ended up playing both sides. Tweener became Bellick's informant while also trying to remain part of the escape group, a dangerous game that would ultimately destroy him. His presence illustrated a crucial truth about conspiracy. The more people involved, the more points of potential failure emerge. Managing this disparate group required Michael to function as strategist, diplomat, and psychologist simultaneously. He had to understand each person's motivation, predict their behavior under stress, and maintain cohesion among individuals who would never voluntarily cooperate. It was like conducting an orchestra where every musician wanted to play a different song. The physical aspects of the escape plan were intricate enough. Michael had tattooed the complete structural blueprint of Fox River Penitentiary across his torso, arms, and back, disguising the plans within what appeared to be elaborate artistic designs. Every line, every symbol encoded crucial information: duct systems, guard rotations, bolt specifications, chemical formulas for corroding specific materials. The tattoo was simultaneously a work of art and a functional map, hiding sophisticated intelligence in plain sight. But knowledge alone was insufficient. The escape required resources, tools, chemicals, time, and space to work undetected. Each element had to be obtained through careful manipulation of the prison economy and guard. Corruption. Michael needed a bolt cutter, so he maneuvered to get assigned to prison industry where such tools existed. He needed a chemical compound to deteriorate concrete, so he manipulated events to gain access to the prison infirmary where such substances were stored. He needed time alone in specific locations, so he created diversions, exploited guard schedules, and used his relationship with Warden Pope to access areas normally forbidden. Every step required perfect timing. The escape plan was not a static blueprint, but a dynamic strategy that had to adapt to constantly changing circumstances. When one route closed, Michael identified another. When one resource became unavailable, he found an alternative. His genius was not just in the initial planning, but in the continuous improvisation required to keep the plan alive as circumstances evolved. The psychological dimension was equally crucial. Michael had to maintain the loyalty and discipline of men who were not naturally inclined toward cooperation. He did this through a combination of inspiration and control. He shared information selectively, never giving anyone the complete picture except himself. This ensured that no single person could betray the entire plan or proceed without him. It also meant that if anything went wrong, Michael bore the full weight of responsibility. Consider the delicate dance Michael performed with Sarah Tancredi, the prison doctor, who represented both romantic possibility and practical necessity. Sarah was competent, compassionate, and naive about the depths of prison corruption. She trusted that the system, however flawed, operated according to rules and regulations. Michael needed her trust to access medical supplies and move freely through certain prison areas. But he also genuinely cared for her, creating an emotional complication that his original plan had not anticipated. Their relationship developed gradually, built on conversations during insulin injections for Michael's fabricated diabetes, shared moments of humanity in an inhumane environment. Sarah represented everything Michael had sacrificed by entering prison: freedom, normalcy, the possibility of genuine connection untainted by strategy and deception. Yet even as he fell for her, he was using her, manipulating her trust and compassion to serve his escape plan. The moral weight of this deception haunted Michael. He was not a naturally duplicitous person. Every lie he told, every person he manipulated, every compromise he made with his own ethics cost him something. But the alternative was Lincoln's execution, and that was unacceptable. So Michael bore the burden, compartmentalized the guilt, and continued forward. The chess game between Michael and the authorities intensified as the escape date approached. Bellick, for all his limitations, was not stupid. He sensed something was wrong, noticed patterns in Michael's behavior that suggested planning and coordination. He increased surveillance, conducted random searches, tightened controls. Each new restriction forced Michael to adapt his strategy, finding new routes and methods. Warden Pope, meanwhile, struggled with conflicting loyalties. He wanted to believe Michael was helping him with the Taj Mahal model out of genuine appreciation for beauty and architecture, but doubts crept in. When evidence suggested Michael might be involved in something suspicious, Pope faced a painful choice: investigate the man who had brought meaning back to his grief-stricken life, or look away and maintain the illusion of redemption. As the escape plan reached its final stages, the complexity reached a crescendo. 8 men with different motivations had to coordinate their actions perfectly. They had to dig through floors, navigate utility tunnels, breach perimeter walls, and reach freedom, all while avoiding guards, cameras, and each other's conflicting agendas. The margin for error was non-existent. One mistake, one moment of bad luck or poor timing, and the entire conspiracy would collapse. The night of the escape arrived with the weight of inevitability. Everything Michael had planned, every manipulation and risk and sacrifice, converged on a single window of opportunity. The guards would rotate shifts at a specific time. The prison would be distracted by a manufactured crisis. The utility tunnels would be accessible for exactly 17 minutes. After that, the window would close. 8 men entered those tunnels. The darkness swallowed them, and in that darkness, freedom waited, or death, or capture, or any number of possibilities that Michael's brilliant mind had calculated but could not fully control. The walls of Fox River had contained them, but walls are only as strong as the systems that maintain them. And Michael Scofield had spent months identifying every weakness in that system, every point where human corruption or error created opportunity. He had played the game with extraordinary skill, sacrificing pieces when necessary, protecting key assets, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But the game was not over. The escape was only the beginning. Beyond the walls, other powers waited, far more dangerous than anything Fox River contained. The company that had framed Lincoln would not accept this humiliation. They would hunt. They would kill. They would bring resources to bear that made prison guards look like children playing at authority. Michael knew this. He had always known this. Freedom from Fox River was not true freedom. It was merely the next phase of a longer game, one where the stakes were not just incarceration but life itself. The tunnel beckoned. The moment demanded action, and 8 desperate men crawled toward a future none of them could predict. In nature, the most successful predators are rarely the largest or the strongest. They are the most invisible. The spider does not announce its presence. The viper does not advertise its venom. They wait, camouflaged within their environments, striking only when the moment is perfect. The company, the shadowy organization that had framed Lincoln Burrows and would hunt the escaped convicts across continents, understood this principle with chilling clarity. Consider what it means to exist as a conspiracy at the highest levels of power. The company was not a rogue element operating outside governmental authority. It was woven into the fabric of that authority, indistinguishable from legitimate institutions, using official resources for unofficial purposes. Its members held positions in intelligence agencies, law enforcement, corporate boardrooms, and political offices. They were judges and agents and advisors, people whose names appeared on organizational charts and whose actions seemed entirely proper to external observers. This was the genius of their design. A conspiracy that appears to be conspiracy is vulnerable to exposure, but a conspiracy that operates through legitimate channels, that uses official budgets and legal authorities to accomplish illegal objectives, becomes almost impossible to prove or prosecute. How do you fight an enemy that looks exactly like the system itself? At the apex of the company's visible structure sat President Caroline Reynolds, a woman who had climbed to the highest office in American government through a combination of political skill, ruthless pragmatism, and strategic alliance with forces that operated in the shadows. She was not the founder of the company. It had existed long before her presidency. But she had made a devil's bargain, exchanging her cooperation for their support in securing and maintaining power. The mechanism of that bargain was both simple and monstrous. Her brother, Terence Stedman, had engineered a scheme involving corporate fraud and illegal contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When the scheme threatened exposure, the company offered a solution. Stedman would fake his death, disappear into protected obscurity, and, Another man would be framed for his murder. That man was Lincoln Burrows. Why Lincoln? The selection was not random. Lincoln had a criminal history, had been arrested multiple times, fit the profile of someone capable of violence. More importantly, he had no powerful connections, no resources to mount an effective defense, no social capital that might complicate the frame. He was, in the cold calculus of conspiracy, disposable. The plan was executed with surgical precision. Stedman's murder was staged with manufactured evidence, planted witnesses, and manipulated forensics. Lincoln was arrested, tried in a court where judge and prosecutors were either corrupted or deceived, and sentenced to death. The legal system, designed to protect the innocent, became the weapon that would execute an innocent man. But the company had not anticipated Michael Scofield. They had not imagined that Lincoln's brother possessed the intelligence, the will, and the absolute determination to shatter their carefully constructed frame. Michael's decision to break Lincoln out of prison was not just an act of familial love. It was an act of war against an enemy that controlled resources and powers beyond anything he had faced in Fox River. The company's organizational structure was deliberately opaque. There was no headquarters, no central office where conspirators gathered. Communication occurred through secure channels, coded messages, and face-to-face meetings in locations that left no records. Members operated in cells, knowing only what they needed to know, insulated from exposure if other cells were compromised. This compartmentalization made the organization resilient. You could not destroy it by capturing one person or raiding one location. It was hydra-headed, regenerating faster than it could be dismantled. Funding flowed through legitimate channels. The company used government black budgets, money appropriated for classified programs that faced minimal oversight. They used shell corporations, laundering funds through layers of subsidiaries and offshore accounts. They used charitable foundations and think tanks, respectable organizations that provided cover for money that ultimately served very different purposes than their public missions suggested. This financial infrastructure meant the company could mobilize enormous resources instantly. They could hire mercenaries, bribe officials, purchase surveillance equipment, and maintain safe houses across multiple countries without leaving obvious trails. Money, in sufficient quantities deployed with sufficient secrecy, can accomplish almost anything. When Michael and his fellow escapees broke out of Fox River, the company faced an unexpected crisis. The escape itself was embarrassing, suggesting that their frame job was imperfect enough that someone had been willing to risk everything to undo it. But more concerning was what the escapees might discover during their flight. Lincoln was innocent, which meant evidence of his innocence existed somewhere. Stedman was alive, which meant witnesses to that fact existed. The conspiracy had loose ends, and loose ends, if pulled correctly, could unravel everything. The company's response was immediate and multifaceted. They mobilized law enforcement through official channels, issuing fugitive warrants and deploying U.S. Marshals to hunt the escapees. This provided legal cover and abundant resources. But they also deployed their own operatives, agents who were not constrained by legal procedures or constitutional protections, who could kill without warrants or questions. The key operative in this hunt was Special Agent Alexander Mahone, a FBI agent whose reputation for capturing fugitives was legendary. Mahone had never failed to catch his targets. His methods were unorthodox, bordering on illegal, but his results were undeniable. He thought like the fugitives he hunted, predicted their movements, positioned himself ahead of their plans rather than chasing behind their actions. The company recruited Mahone through the most effective form of leverage. They exploited his grief and guilt. Mahone's son had been killed years earlier, a traumatic loss that haunted every moment of his existence. The company provided a narrative, true or false. It hardly mattered that connected the son's death to criminals who had escaped justice. They offered Mahone purpose, the promise that hunting these fugitives was somehow connected to avenging his son, and they provided pharmaceutical assistance, drugs that helped him function despite the psychological damage he carried. Mahone was brilliant and broken, a weapon aimed at the escapees with precision. The company had perfected over decades of manipulating motivated individuals. He was not simply hunting criminals, he was pursuing his own redemption, believing that catching these men would somehow fill the void his son's death had created. This made him relentless, and relentlessness, when combined with intelligence and resources, is nearly unstoppable. The hunt unfolded across America with chess-like complexity. The escapees split up, each pursuing their own objectives while trying to evade capture. Michael and Lincoln sought evidence of the conspiracy, determined to clear Lincoln's name and expose the company. Sucre searched for Maricruz, his motivation purely personal, unconcerned with larger conspiracies. C-Note tried to reach his family, desperate to see his daughter, before capture became inevitable. Abruzzi sought revenge against Fibonacci, the witness whose testimony had imprisoned him. Teabag pursued freedom and violence with equal enthusiasm, leaving a trail of victims that made him the easiest to track. Mahone studied their patterns, developed psychological profiles, and predicted their movements with disturbing accuracy. He understood that fugitives operate according to predictable needs: food, shelter, money, and connection to the people they care about. Every one of these needs creates vulnerability, opportunities for observation and interception. Mahone positioned surveillance at locations fugitives were likely to contact, monitored financial transactions, and tracked digital footprints in an age where disappearing completely was becoming increasingly difficult. But Mahone also employed more direct methods. The company authorized him to eliminate fugitives rather than capture them when necessary. This was efficient. Dead men cannot testify or complicate narratives, but it was also illegal, murder disguised as law enforcement. Mahone killed with the dispassionate precision of someone who had convinced himself that morality was a luxury he could not afford in pursuit of justice. The fugitives gradually began to understand the scope of what they faced. They had escaped Fox River only to discover they were trapped in a larger prison, one without visible walls but with far more sophisticated security systems. The company monitored communications, tracked movements, and maintained networks of informants who reported suspicious activity. Freedom was an illusion. They were mice in a maze designed by an intelligence that had anticipated every possible route. Veronica Donovan, Lincoln's former lover and the attorney investigating his case, came closest to exposing the conspiracy from the outside. She discovered anomalies in the evidence against Lincoln, identified connections between witnesses and government officials, and followed the trail toward Terence Stedman. Her investigation was methodical, legally grounded, exactly the kind of threat the company could not tolerate. They eliminated her. The method was efficient and designed to look like accident or random violence rather than targeted assassination. Veronica's death sent a clear message to anyone else who might consider investigating. The company protected itself with lethal efficiency. The legal system, which Veronica had trusted to expose corruption, had failed her completely. Inside the company's strategic planning, decisions about which fugitives to eliminate and which to capture alive followed cold calculations. Some escapees posed minimal threat. Sucre, for instance, knew nothing about the conspiracy and simply wanted to reunite with his girlfriend. Others, like Abruzzi, were dangerous criminals whose deaths could be explained easily and celebrated publicly. But Michael and Lincoln were different. They knew too much, had survived too long, and had become media stories that complicated simple elimination. The company needed Michael and Lincoln's deaths to appear legal and justified. This meant engineering situations where law enforcement would kill them in circumstances that appeared to be self-defense or necessary force. Mahone orchestrated several such scenarios, placing the brothers in positions where they would be cornered and forced to fight back, providing legal justification for lethal response. But Michael's intelligence and Lincoln's survival instincts proved more formidable than anticipated. They evaded traps, avoided confrontations, and continued gathering evidence despite overwhelming odds. Each day they remained free was a day closer to potential exposure. The company intensified pressure, mobilizing more resources, accepting more risk of exposure themselves in order to eliminate the threat the brothers represented. The strategic calculation shifted when Michael and Lincoln discovered Stedman was alive. This evidence, if properly documented and presented, could unravel everything. The company faced a choice: continue trying to eliminate the brothers and risk greater exposure, or attempt to contain the damage through other means. They chose containment through escalation. President Reynolds used her executive authority to classify evidence, suppress investigations, and protect the company's operations through official channels. She could not make the problem disappear. Too many people knew fragments of the truth, but she could make proving the truth legally impossible. Evidence became classified for national security reasons. Witnesses received immunity in exchange for silence. Documents disappeared into bureaucratic labyrinths. The genius of this approach was that it used the system's own complexity as camouflage. The American government is vast, with countless agencies and overlapping jurisdictions and classification authorities. Information can be hidden not by destroying it, but by burying it in legitimate secrecy, where accessing it requires clearances and authorities that independent investigators will never possess. Meanwhile, the company began planning their next phase. If the escapees could not be immediately eliminated, they could be neutralized through new imprisonment. The company had resources and influence in multiple countries. They began engineering a situation where Michael would be captured and imprisoned, not in an American facility, but in a foreign prison under circumstances that would make rescue nearly impossible. This strategy reflected sophisticated thinking about the company's vulnerabilities. Michael had broken out of Fox River, proving that American prisons were not foolproof. But a prison in Panama, run by local authorities who could be influenced through diplomatic pressure and financial incentives, offered different advantages. If Michael could be maneuvered into such a facility, he would be neutralized without the complications of an American trial or execution. The plan required patience and careful manipulation of circumstances. The company could not simply kidnap Michael and transport him to Panama. That would be too obviously criminal. They needed Michael to go to Panama voluntarily, pursuing objectives that served the company's larger goals. This required layers of deception, false trails, and manufactured motivations that would make Michael believe he was acting according to his own plan, while actually following the company's design. Agent Kellerman embodied the company's operational philosophy. He was charming when necessary, brutal when required, and absolutely without moral constraint. His loyalty was not to country or law, but to the company itself, and through them, to his own advancement and survival. Kellerman understood that the company rewarded success and eliminated failure, which made him extraordinarily careful in his operations, while also willing to take extreme actions when situations demanded. Kellerman's pursuit of Sara Tancredi illustrated the company's willingness to target innocent people to achieve objectives. Sara had helped Michael during the escape, knowingly or unknowingly providing crucial assistance. This made her both a potential witness and a lever to use against Michael. The company understood that Michael's feelings for Sara created vulnerability, and vulnerability could be exploited. They attempted to kill Sara, forcing her into hiding. But when killing her proved difficult, they shifted strategy to capture, planning to use her as bait to lure Michael into traps. This flexibility, adapting methods to circumstances while maintaining focus on objectives, was characteristic of the company's operational effectiveness. The company's intelligence network extended globally. They maintained relationships with intelligence services in dozens of countries, sharing information and resources through official and unofficial channels. This meant that even if the fugitives fled America, they would find surveillance and pursuit awaiting them. There was no safe haven, no jurisdiction beyond the company's reach. But intelligence networks create their own vulnerabilities. Information must be communicated, which creates intercept opportunities. Agents must be recruited and managed, which creates potential for infiltration or corruption. The more extensive an organization becomes, the more points of failure it accumulates. Michael began to understand this, began to see that the company's strength, its vast network, was also a weakness. If he could identify key nodes in that network and attack them strategically, he might create cascading failures that would expose and destabilize the entire structure. The hunt evolved into a war of intelligence, both sides maneuvering for advantage while trying to conceal their own vulnerabilities. The company had resources, but Michael had motivation and intelligence that made him unpredictable. He thought laterally, identifying approaches that the company's more conventional operatives missed. He exploited their overconfidence, their assumption that superior resources guaranteed victory. When Michael and Lincoln finally confronted Stedman, when they obtained recorded evidence of his confession that Lincoln was innocent and the entire frame had been orchestrated by the company, they believed they had won. They believed that evidence, properly presented to authorities, would trigger investigations that the company could not contain. They were wrong. The company demonstrated the full scope of their power by making Stedman disappear again, by suppressing the evidence through classification, by ensuring that anyone who might have pursued investigation received clear messages about the consequences of doing so. The legal system that should have protected justice became the instrument of injustice's preservation. This was the moment when Michael and Lincoln fully understood what they faced. The company was not just a conspiracy, it was a shadow government, operating with the resources and authorities of the state itself, accountable to no one, constrained by no law that it could not circumvent or ignore. Fighting such an organization through conventional means was futile. The company offered Michael a choice disguised as an opportunity: work for them, use his intelligence in their service, and Lincoln would be allowed to live. Refuse, and both brothers would die, along with everyone they cared about. It was not really a choice. It was submission demanded through overwhelming force. Michael found himself in Panama, exactly where the company had planned all along, imprisoned in Sona Penitentiary under circumstances that made escape seem impossible. The company had won this phase of the game, but the game itself was far from over. In the darkest moment, when hope seemed extinguished and the company's power appeared absolute, Michael began to plan again. Because that was who he was. That was what he did. He saw patterns where others saw chaos. He identified weaknesses where others saw only strength. And he believed, against all evidence and reason, that intelligence and determination could overcome even the most overwhelming advantages. The company believed they had contained the threat. They believed Michael was neutralized, Lincoln was controlled, and the conspiracy was secure. They had outmaneuvered brilliant opponents, mobilized vast resources, and achieved their objectives through methods that left no legal recourse. But the company had made one critical error. They had allowed Michael Scofield to live. And as long as Michael lived, the game continued. The walls of Sona rose like judgments, concrete and rebar under tropical sun, containing men the Panamanian government had abandoned to their own brutal governance. Michael stood in that courtyard, assessing his new prison, already calculating angles and possibilities. The company watched from the outside, confident in their control. They had no idea what they had created by pushing Michael to this point. They had turned a man fighting for his brother's freedom into a man with nothing left to lose. And that, as any student of history knows, is the most dangerous kind of opponent. There are places on Earth where the veneer of civilization has been stripped away, where humanity reverts to its most primal state, governed not by law but by the raw mathematics of survival. Sona Penitentiary, located in the sweltering heat of Panama, was such a place. But what made Sona truly extraordinary, truly terrifying, was not the absence of civilization, but its deliberate abandonment. The Panamanian government had built these walls, filled them with prisoners, and then walked away. Imagine a prison without guards, without officials, without any external authority monitoring behavior or enforcing rules. The government delivered food and water to the gates, but beyond those gates, they exercised no control whatsoever. A riot years earlier had resulted in the guards withdrawing, and rather than reclaim the facility through force, the government had simply sealed it. Sona became a tomb for the living, a concrete container where 1,800 men created their own society, according to principles that would have horrified the architects who designed the place. This was not chaos. Chaos would have been simpler, more honest. What emerged in Sona was order, but order of a particularly brutal kind. In the absence of external authority, internal authority consolidated around those willing and able to impose it through violence. A hierarchy emerged, as rigid and unforgiving as any governmental structure, enforced not through laws, but through the constant threat and reality of physical domination. At the apex of Sona's power structure sat Lechero, a name that meant milkman in Spanish, but carried connotations far removed from pastoral innocence. Lechero ruled Sona the way medieval warlords ruled territories through personal charisma, strategic violence, and the maintenance of a reputation so fearsome that most challenges died before they were voiced. He was not the strongest man in Sona, nor the most violent, though he was certainly both strong and willing to kill. His power derived from something more sophisticated, the ability to organize violence, to delegate authority to lieutenants who enforced his will, and to make examples of anyone who questioned his supremacy. Lechero's throne was literal, a chair positioned in the courtyard where he held court, dispensing judgment on disputes, authorizing punishments, and receiving tributes. Around him operated a government in miniature, with advisors and enforcers and economic ministers who managed the flow of resources within Sona's walls. It was feudalism reconstructed in concrete and tropical heat, sustained by the same fundamental principle that had sustained feudal systems throughout history: monopoly on legitimate violence. The economic system within Sona was remarkably sophisticated given the constraints. Money had limited utility in a place where nothing could be purchased from outside except what came through official channels. What mattered was access to resources: food beyond the basic rations, weapons, drugs, space, and security. These resources were scarce, and scarcity creates markets. Lechero controlled the primary distribution channels, which made him wealthy by Sona's standards and gave him the economic power to reinforce his political dominance. Food arrived from outside in quantities sufficient for survival but inadequate for comfort. Lechero controlled its distribution, ensuring his loyalists ate well while those who challenged him went hungry. This was not merely cruelty, though. Cruelty was certainly present, but strategic resource allocation. Hunger is a powerful motivator for submission. Well-fed allies are more reliable than hungry ones. The mathematics of nutrition became the mathematics of control. Weapons within Sona ranged from sharpened metal scraps to smuggled guns that commanded extraordinary value. Lechero's organization maintained the best armed force inside the prison, outgunning potential rivals and ensuring that any challenge to his authority would be suicidal. The monopoly on superior violence was carefully maintained, with periodic displays of overwhelming force reminding the population that resistance meant death. Drugs provided another avenue of control and profit. Cocaine, marijuana, and various pharmaceuticals flowed into Sona through corrupt officials on the outside who accepted bribes to supplement the basic deliveries. Lechero taxed this trade, taking a percentage of everything that entered. Inmates who wanted to use drugs paid his prices. Those who tried to smuggle independently faced brutal consequences. The drug economy generated loyalty, funded Lechero's operations, and provided comfort to those desperate enough to trade anything for temporary escape from Sona's reality. Space itself became a commodity. The prison had cells, dormitories, and open areas, but not all space was equal. Some locations offered privacy, security from attack, or access to amenities. Lechero controlled the best quarters, distributing desirable space to allies while forcing enemies into the most vulnerable locations. Where you slept in Sona was not a matter of chance but a reflection of your position in the hierarchy. Into this brutal ecosystem walked Michael Scofield, delivered by forces beyond his control, deposited in hell with a mission that seemed impossible even by his standards. The company wanted James Whistler, another prisoner in Sona, extracted alive. They had made the terms clear: break Whistler out, or everyone Michael loved would die. Lincoln was on the outside, working as the company's agent to coordinate the escape from the exterior. Sarah Tancredi, the woman Michael loved, was held hostage to ensure compliance. The leverage was perfect, the pressure absolute. But before Michael could plan any escape, he had to survive his first days in Sona. And survival meant navigating the power structure with extraordinary care. He entered with nothing. No allies, no reputation, no resources. In Fox River, he had arrived with a plan fully formed, tattooed across his body, every variable accounted for before he walked through the gates. Sona was different. Here he was improvising from the first moment, reacting to immediate threats while trying to understand the system well enough to manipulate it. Michael's initial strategy was observation. He watched how power flowed through Sona's social networks, identified who held authority and why, assessed who might be approachable and who was irrevocably aligned with Lechero. This reconnaissance was dangerous, showing too much interest attracted attention, appearing too weak invited attack. Michael walked a careful line, projecting neither threat nor weakness, trying to become temporarily invisible while gathering intelligence. He quickly identified that Whistler, his target, occupied an unusual position in Sona's hierarchy. Whistler was educated, intelligent, and had somehow earned Lechero's protection. This complicated everything. Michael could not simply approach Whistler directly without arousing suspicion. Any escape plan involving Whistler would require either Lechero's cooperation or his circumvention, and both options carried enormous risk. Michael's entry strategy required establishing credibility quickly. In Fox River, his reputation had been built on demonstrated intelligence and the gradual revelation that he possessed a master plan. In Sona, he had no such luxury. He needed to prove his value immediately, or risk being relegated to the bottom of the hierarchy, where survival itself became the only objective. The opportunity came through violence, as opportunities often did in Sona. When Michael witnessed an assault and intervened with unexpected tactical skill, demonstrating both courage and combatability he had developed during his time as a fugitive, he caught Lechero's attention. This was strategic theatre. Michael was not naturally violent, but he understood that in Sona's economy of reputation, demonstrated willingness to fight elevated status. The intervention was calculated to position him as someone useful rather than threatening, capable but not challenging Lechero's dominance. Lechero was astute enough to recognize intelligence when he encountered it. Michael's education and obvious strategic thinking made him potentially valuable in ways that simple muscle could not provide. Lekero ruled through violence, but he was not stupid. He understood that governing 1,800 desperate men required more than beatings. It required calculation, planning, and the kind of intelligence Michael possessed. The negotiation between Michael and Lekero unfolded with careful mutual assessment. Michael needed access to Whistler and resources to plan an escape. Lekero needed solutions to problems his violence could not solve. The prison's infrastructure was deteriorating, creating hazards that threatened everyone, including Lekero himself. Michael offered his engineering expertise in exchange for position within Lechero's organization. It was a devil's bargain, but pragmatism rather than morality governed decisions in Sona. Michael's integration into Lechero's inner circle provided access and protection, but it also created moral complications. He was now part of the system of oppression he found reprehensible, helping to maintain order in a place where order meant brutality. Every decision Lechero made that Michael facilitated, every punishment Michael witnessed and did not prevent, weighed on his conscience. But the alternative, refusing to cooperate, meant losing access to Whistler and condemning Sarah to death. This was the trap the company had engineered with malicious precision. They had not simply imprisoned Michael in Sona, they had forced him to become complicit in Sona's brutality to achieve his objectives. Every compromise he made, every moment he stood beside Lechero while injustice occurred, eroded the moral foundation that had motivated his original decision to save Lincoln. The company was destroying Michael not just physically but spiritually, transforming a man who had acted from love and justice into someone who collaborated with evil. Alex Mahone's presence in Sona added another layer of complexity. The former FBI agent, now himself a prisoner after his allegiance to the company had been exposed and betrayed, brought valuable intelligence and tactical expertise. But Mahone was also psychologically unstable, addicted to drugs, haunted by his son's death and his own crimes. His value as an ally was offset by his unreliability. The relationship between Michael and Mahone evolved from mutual hostility to grudging cooperation. They had been enemies during the hunt, predator and prey, but Sona's circumstances created strange alliances. Mahone possessed knowledge of the company's operations that could prove crucial. Michael possessed the planning ability and leadership that gave purpose to Mahone's skills. Neither trusted the other completely, but trust was a luxury neither could afford to insist upon. Theodore Bagwell, the monstrous T-Bag, had also found his way to Sona through circumstances that would have destroyed lesser survivors. T-Bag was adaptable in ways that were simultaneously impressive and horrifying. He quickly identified opportunities to make himself useful, attaching himself to power structures and providing services that more principled men would refuse. In Fox River, T-Bag had been despised but tolerated. In Sona, he found his element, thriving in the moral vacuum where his particular talents had maximum value. Michael's relationship with T-Bag remained one of mutual disgust and practical necessity. T-Bag knew things, had connections, and possessed survival instincts that occasionally proved useful. But every interaction with him was contaminating, a reminder of the compromises Michael was making just by remaining alive in this place. The escape planning faced challenges that made Fox River seem simple by comparison. In Fox River, Michael had months to prepare, a complete blueprint tattooed on his body, and the ability to acquire resources through the prison's official systems. In Sona, everything had to be improvised. There were no official work assignments, no systematic way to access tools or materials. The prison's infrastructure was crumbling, but not in ways that obviously suggested escape routes, and overseeing everything was Lechero, whose suspicion would be fatal to any plan. Michael's strategy involved multiple layers of deception. He had to plan an escape that appeared to serve Lechero's interests, or at least not threaten them, while actually achieving his objective of extracting Whistler. This meant creating diversions, manufacturing motivations, and exploiting the one factor that Lechero could not control: the company's resources operating from outside. Lincoln, working on the exterior, provided crucial support that would have been impossible in Fox River. He could acquire vehicles, scout routes, bribe officials, and coordinate timing in ways that gave the escape plan dimensions impossible within the prison itself. But Lincoln's cooperation came with its own agonies. He was working for the company, taking orders from the same organization that had framed him for murder, compromised because they held Sarah hostage. The moral erosion affected Lincoln as deeply as it affected Michael. Both brothers had begun their journey fighting against injustice, determined to expose truth and protect innocence. Now they were the company's tools, achieving the company's objectives, perpetuating the company's power through their cooperation. Every step toward escape was simultaneously a step deeper into compromise. Gretchen Morgan, the company's operative managing the sonar operation from outside, embodied cold strategic calculation. She was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly without mercy. Her leverage over the brothers was perfect. She held Sarah, she controlled resources, she set the timeline. Michael and Lincoln could plan and scheme, but ultimately they were executing Gretchen's objectives according to her schedule. Gretchen's tactics included psychological torture refined over years of company operations. She provided just enough information to maintain hope while withholding confirmation that Sarah was alive. She created artificial deadlines that forced rushed decisions. She manipulated circumstances to ensure Michael and Lincoln remained isolated, unable to seek outside help or expose the company's coercion. The interpersonal dynamics within Sonar's escape team were volatile. Michael, Mahone, Whistler, and eventually others who became aware of the plan all had different motivations and levels of trust. Michael was trying to save Sarah. Mahone wanted revenge against the company for betraying him. Whistler had his own mysterious objectives that remained opaque. Managing these competing interests while maintaining operational security required constant vigilance. Whistler himself was an enigma. He was educated, spoke multiple languages, and possessed knowledge that the company desperately wanted. But his background was murky, his loyalties unclear. Michael could not determine if Whistler was victim or villain, whether extracting him from Sonar served justice or evil. The moral ambiguity was maddening. Another layer of the company's psychological warfare, the actual escape mechanics involved tunneling, as so many prison escapes do, but with complications unique to Sonar's circumstances. Without official oversight, there were opportunities to dig that would have been impossible in a conventional prison. But without official structure, there were also no systematic ways to hide the excavation or dispose of dirt. Every innovation created new problems requiring new solutions. Michael's engineering expertise proved invaluable. He calculated structural loads, identified weak points in the prison's foundation, and designed supports that would prevent catastrophic collapse during tunneling. The escape route had to be long enough to clear Sonar's perimeter, but not so long that it became impossible to complete before deadlines passed. Every meter of progress was bought with exhausting labor conducted in secrecy under constant risk of discovery. Lechero's eventual discovery of the escape plan represented the crisis Michael had dreaded from the beginning. Lechero's response was characteristically brutal. He demanded inclusion. If Michael was escaping, then Lechero was escaping with him. The logic was simple. Lechero had maintained power in Sonar for years, but power in Sonar was still imprisonment. Given opportunity to escape, he would take it, regardless of Michael's objectives. This forced Michael to integrate Lechero into plans that had not accounted for his presence. Lecaro's inclusion meant additional complexity, another person who might betray the plan or make demands that compromised its success. But refusing Lecaro meant immediate death and plan failure. Michael had no choice but to adapt, to find ways to use Lecaro's presence productively while minimizing the risks it created. The final days before the escape were characterized by escalating tension. The company's deadline approached. The tunnel neared completion. Lecaro's suspicions intensified. Other prisoners began to notice unusual activity. Every variable that could go wrong threatened to do so simultaneously. Michael found himself in a familiar position, orchestrating a complex escape under impossible conditions with unwilling allies and overwhelming opposition. But this time felt different. In Fox River, he had been fighting for justice, to save an innocent brother from corrupt systems. In Sona, he was fighting for survival, to satisfy demands from the same corrupt forces he had once opposed. The moral clarity that had sustained him through Fox River's darkness was gone, replaced by shades of grey that offered no guidance, no assurance that his actions served any purpose beyond delaying inevitable defeat. The night of the escape arrived with tropical rain, thunder masking sounds, darkness providing cover. Michael led his group into the tunnel, knowing that success meant delivering Whistler to the company, empowering the same organization that had caused all this suffering. But failure meant Sarah's death, and that was unacceptable regardless of what it cost his soul. They crawled through mud and darkness, emerged on the far side of Sona's walls, and encountered what awaited beyond. Not freedom, but the next phase of the company's plan, whatever that might be. Lecaro did not make it. He died in the escape, killed by circumstances or betrayal in the chaos. Causation became impossible to determine. His death was mourningless, unremarked, except as a practical matter of one less person to manage. This was what Sona did to people. It stripped away their humanity until even death became merely tactical consideration. Michael stood outside Sona's walls, rain washing over him, knowing he had traded one prison for another. The walls were gone, but the company's control remained absolute. He had escaped Sona's brutal economics only to return to the company's more sophisticated brutality. And somewhere, Sarah waited, her survival dependent on Michael's continued compliance. The game continued, the pieces moved, and the cost of playing rose with every passing day. There comes a moment in every conflict when the pursued becomes the pursuer, when the victim transforms into the aggressor, when survival instinct evolves into strategic offense. For Michael Schofield and his allies, that transformation occurred when they discovered Scylla, a black book containing the complete operational structure of the company, every member, every operation, every financial transaction encoded in digital form. Scylla was not merely evidence, it was a weapon, the ultimate leverage against an organization that had seemed untouchable. But possessing knowledge of Scylla's existence and actually obtaining it were separated by an ocean of obstacles. The company had not survived for decades by leaving their secrets vulnerable to theft. Scylla was protected by layers of security, both physical and cryptographic, distributed across multiple locations, accessible only to the highest-ranking members of the organization. Stealing it would require not just one impossible heist, but several, each more dangerous than the last. The transformation of Michael's team from fugitives to operatives occurred through an unexpected alliance with Homeland Security. Agent Don Self, a DHS operative who claimed to be investigating the company's illegal activities, approached the team with a proposition: work for us, steal Scylla, and receive full immunity, plus the resources to accomplish what would otherwise be impossible. It seemed too fortunate, too perfectly aligned with their desperate need for legitimacy and support. Michael, hardened by experience with the company's manipulations, recognized the possibility of deception, but faced limited alternatives. They were fugitives with no legal standing, hunted by every law enforcement agency, unable to move freely or access resources. Self's offer provided cover, funding, and most crucially, a pathway toward destroying the company that did not require remaining in the shadows. The decision to cooperate was not trust, but calculated pragmatism. Use Homeland Security while remaining vigilant for inevitable betrayal. General Jonathan Krantz represented the company's true power center, the man whose vision and strategic brilliance had built the organization into its current form. While President Reynolds had been the public face of company influence, Krantz was the architect, the strategist who operated from complete obscurity. His existence was unknown to most company operatives, his identity protected by layers of intermediaries and operational security that had kept him invisible for decades. Krantz understood power in its purest form. Information is currency, secrecy is security, and loyalty is purchased through a combination of reward and fear. He had built the company by recruiting individuals at crucial points in their careers, offering them resources and opportunities in exchange for absolute obedience. Those who served well advanced, those who failed or betrayed disappeared without trace. The system was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its efficiency. Scylla existed as Krantz's insurance policy and operational Bible. It contained financial records showing how the company laundered billions through legitimate businesses. It held personnel files identifying every operative, every compromised official, every asset the organization controlled. It documented operations spanning decades, crimes that would destroy administrations and imprison hundreds if exposed. Scylla was both the company's greatest vulnerability and Krantz's ultimate protection. If he fell, everyone fell, ensuring that powerful people had vested interest in his survival. The device itself was technologically sophisticated, encrypted with algorithms that required not just passwords but physical access to 6 separate cards held by 6 high-ranking company members. Each card contained a piece of the decryption key. All 6 were necessary to unlock Scylla. This distribution ensured no single person could access the complete information, protecting against theft or betrayal by any individual operative. Michael's team faced a strategic challenge of unprecedented complexity. They had to identify the 6 cardholders, surveil their movements, identify vulnerabilities, plan infiltrations, execute thefts, and do all of this without alerting the company to what was happening. Each operation carried catastrophic risk. Each card obtained made the remaining cards more heavily guarded as the company recognized a pattern. The team's composition reflected the diverse skills required. Michael provided strategic planning and engineering expertise, designing operations that exploited structural and security vulnerabilities. Lincoln supplied physical capability and unwavering determination, executing the dangerous work that required courage over calculation. Sucre, having proven his loyalty through multiple escapes and survival, offered infiltration skills and unshakable reliability. Mahone contributed tactical planning and intelligence analysis, his former FBI training invaluable for anticipating security responses. Bellick, the former Fox River Guard, who had pursued them so relentlessly, had unexpectedly joined the team after his own imprisonment and escape. His knowledge of security systems and guard psychology provided insights the others lacked. The transformation from enemy to ally was never complete. Old resentments lingered, but necessity created cooperation where friendship never would. Roland Glenn, a hacker recruited for his technical expertise, handled the digital aspects of their operations. He could bypass electronic security, manipulate surveillance systems, and access databases that would otherwise be impenetrable. But Roland was also self-interested and cowardly, requiring constant management to keep him focused on team objectives rather than personal escape plans. The operations to obtain each card followed a pattern of escalating sophistication and danger. The first cardholder worked at a corporate office with standard security protocols. Michael's team conducted reconnaissance, identified the target's routines, and executed a confidence game that gave them access during a vulnerable moment. The theft was clean, professional, accomplished without violence or obvious trace. The cardholder discovered the loss only after the team had vanished. The second operation required more direct action. The cardholder was a government official with security details and restricted access locations. Michael planned an infiltration during a public event where security was dispersed and confusion could provide cover. The team posed as caterers, maintenance workers, and guests, moving through the venue with false credentials while Roland manipulated security cameras to hide their presence. The theft occurred during a carefully choreographed moment when the target was distracted and isolated. Again, they escaped without confrontation. But the company was not blind. After 2 cards disappeared, Krantz recognized a pattern and intensified security for the remaining cardholders. What had been difficult became nearly impossible. The third cardholder retreated into a secure compound with armed guards and sophisticated surveillance. The fourth traveled constantly, never establishing predictable patterns. The fifth was paranoid by nature, trusting no one, vulnerable to nothing. Michael's planning became more elaborate, incorporating multiple backup plans and contingencies for every foreseeable failure point. Each operation was a chess game where the company anticipated their moves and countered preemptively. The team had to think not just 1 step ahead, but 5 or 10, identifying approaches so unconventional that the company's preparations proved inadequate. The resource management aspect of the operation was constant negotiation with Don Self, who controlled funding and equipment. Self operated under his own constraints, budgets, oversight, accountability to superiors, which meant the team could not simply request unlimited resources. Every expenditure had to be justified, every tool accounted for. This created tension between what was needed and what could be obtained, forcing Michael to improvise with inadequate materials and insufficient time. The safe house where the team operated became simultaneously headquarters and prison. They could not leave freely, their fugitive status remained, despite DHS cooperation. They could not contact family or friends without risking exposure. The isolation was psychologically corrosive, creating tensions that Michael had to manage alongside the operational planning. Personalities clashed. Old grievances resurfaced. The pressure of constant danger wore down even the most resilient members. Gretchen Morgan's reappearance added volatile complexity. The company operative who had terrorized them during the Sona operation, who had tortured Sarah and held her hostage, who embodied the company's ruthless efficiency, suddenly she approached them claiming to want alliance. Gretchen said she was being hunted by the company for failure, that Krantz had ordered her elimination, that her only survival lay in helping destroy the organization she had served. Trust was impossible, but Gretchen possessed intelligence about the company's security protocols that would be invaluable. She knew how Krantz thought, how company operations were structured, where vulnerabilities existed. Michael faced an agonizing decision. Accept help from the woman who had caused immeasurable suffering, or refuse on principle and reduce their chances of success. Pragmatism won, as it always did in this war, but the compromise corroded his soul further. Gretchen's integration into the team was tense and fragile. Sarah, who had endured Gretchen's torture, could barely remain in the same room with her. Lincoln wanted to kill her immediately, viewing her presence as intolerable insult added to injury. But Michael insisted, because Gretchen's knowledge was proving accurate and useful, because the operations to obtain the remaining cards required every advantage available. The dynamics of the team shifted with Gretchen's presence. She was a professional in ways the others were not, trained in intelligence work, experienced in covert operations, unencumbered by moral hesitation that slowed the others. She identified vulnerabilities they missed and proposed solutions they had not considered. But she was also calculating her own survival above all else, ready to betray them if circumstances made that the better play. The fourth card's acquisition required infiltrating a company facility that held other prisoners, including one of Michael's former allies from Fox River. The operation became a rescue mission layered over a theft, multiplying the complexity and risk. Michael planned an approach that would liberate the prisoner while obtaining the card, satisfying both practical and moral objectives. But the execution went catastrophically wrong. Bellick died in that operation, sacrificing himself to allow the others to escape with the card. His death was heroic and unexpected, a redemption arc completed in violence and drowning. The former corrupt guard who had made their lives miserable in Fox River gave his life to help them destroy the company. The team mourned him genuinely, surprised by their own grief, recognizing that somewhere along the way Bellick had become not just an ally, but a friend. His death reinforced the stakes. This was not an abstract game of intelligence and counterintelligence. People were dying. The cost of destroying the company was being paid in blood, and no one could predict who would pay next. The team's morale wavered. Several members questioned whether Scylla was worth what they were sacrificing to obtain it. Michael struggled with this question himself. He had entered Fox River to save Lincoln from execution. That clear moral purpose had sustained him through impossible challenges. But now he was leading a team that included a torturer and was working for government agencies that might be as corrupt as the company itself, all to obtain a device that might or might not actually destroy the organization that had ruined their lives. The moral clarity that had once guided him was gone, replaced by exhaustion and doubt. But stopping was impossible. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, obtained too many cards to abandon the mission incomplete. The company would never stop hunting them. Homeland Security would revoke immunity and prosecute them for the crimes they had committed during the operation. The only path was forward, regardless of cost. The fifth card required infiltrating a company, meeting where multiple high-ranking members would be present. This was the most dangerous operation yet, walking directly into enemy territory, surrounded by people who wanted them dead, with minimal margin for error. Michael planned an elaborate deception involving false identities, forged credentials, and precisely timed interventions. The operation succeeded, but barely. They escaped with injuries and near exposure that revealed how thin their advantage had become. Don Self's true nature became apparent as the team neared completion of the Scylla collection. He was not the idealistic DHS agent he had pretended to be. He was an opportunist who saw Scylla as his path to enormous wealth and power. Self planned to steal Scylla for himself, sell it to the highest bidder, likely a foreign intelligence service or criminal organization, and disappear with more money than he could spend in multiple lifetimes. The team's work, their sacrifices, their belief that they were serving justice, all of it was self-serving his own greed. The betrayal was devastating, not because it was unexpected. Michael had always suspected it, but because it confirmed that no institution could be trusted, that corruption extended everywhere, that their fight against the company was simultaneously a fight against the very systems that should have been helping them. Self had used Homeland Security's resources and authority to enable his own criminal enterprise, proving that legitimacy was merely camouflage for self-interest. The team found themselves in an impossible position. They needed the sixth card to complete Scylla, but Self controlled their resources and support. A three-way conflict emerged, the team against Self against the company, each faction maneuvering for advantage while trying to avoid the other two. The strategic complexity reached levels that taxed even Michael's analytical abilities. General Krantz, meanwhile, had identified the threat to Scylla and mobilized the company's full resources to protect it. He understood that losing Scylla meant losing everything. The organization would be exposed, dismantled, its members prosecuted or killed by those they had victimized. Krantz was fighting for survival with the same desperate determination Michael's team brought to the conflict. The final assault on the company's headquarters, where Scylla was ultimately stored, required every skill the team possessed and every scrap of courage they could summon. They were infiltrating the most heavily defended location the company controlled, penetrating layers of physical and electronic security, confronting armed guards and sophisticated countermeasures. The operation was suicide disguised as a plan, undertaken because no alternative remained. Michael's health had been deteriorating throughout the Scylla operation. The tumor in his brain, a consequence of the genetic condition he shared with his mother, was growing. He experienced headaches, seizures, moments of disorientation that threatened operational security. He knew he was dying, knew that time was not just running out on the mission but on his life itself. This knowledge informed every decision. He had nothing to lose, because he was losing everything anyway. The infiltration succeeded through a combination of brilliant planning and desperate improvisation. The team obtained Scylla, that ultimate prize they had sacrificed so much to secure. But the cost was catastrophic. Self was killed, company operatives died, the facility was compromised, and Michael, suffering a severe seizure during the escape, barely survived. With Scylla in hand, the team faced their ultimate strategic decision: what to do with it. They could deliver it to legitimate authorities, hoping someone in government remained uncorrupted enough to use it properly. They could release it publicly, exposing everything and trusting that sunlight would serve as disinfectant. They could destroy it, eliminating the company's records, but also eliminating evidence that might protect them from future accusations. Or they could use it as leverage, negotiating their freedom in exchange for not exposing secrets that would destroy powerful people. Each option carried risks and moral implications. Michael, in his deteriorating condition, struggled to think clearly enough to guide the decision. The team debated, argued, and nearly fractured over disagreements about the path forward. Trust in institutions had been destroyed by Self's betrayal. Trust in public exposure was limited by knowing how effectively the company had suppressed previous revelations. Trust in negotiation was undercut by experience, showing that deals with powerful entities were never honored. Ultimately, they chose exposure with protection, delivering Scylla to a United Nations panel that could investigate internationally, bypassing American institutions they no longer trusted. It was not perfect, but it was the best among imperfect options. The company would be exposed, its members would face justice, or at least consequence, and the team would finally, perhaps, be free. Krantz was captured, the organization dismantled. Company operatives were arrested across multiple countries. The financial networks were frozen. The secrets were revealed. It appeared, briefly, that they had won, but victory was not what Michael had imagined during those first days in Fox River, when saving Lincoln had seemed like the only objective that mattered. Victory was exhaustion and loss and moral compromise. Victory was Bellick dead and Michael dying, and relationships shattered by years of trauma. Victory was discovering that destroying evil required becoming something darker than he had ever wanted to be. Michael's final strategy was the most painful. He surrendered himself to a new company operative, not the organization itself, which was destroyed, but remnants desperate for revenge. He sacrificed himself to ensure the others could live safely, trading his life for theirs because his life was ending anyway, and he could make that ending meaningful. The explosion was brilliant white light, heat and pressure, and then nothing. Michael Scofield died, destroying the last threat to his family and friends. He died ensuring that Sarah could raise their child without fear. He died believing that his brother would finally be free from the consequences of conspiracy that had destroyed years of their lives. He died believing it was over. He was wrong. The company had deeper roots than anyone knew. And Michael Scofield's story was not finished. though he did not know it as the darkness claimed him. 7 years passed. 7 years of silence, of mourning, of Lincoln and Sarah trying to build lives from the wreckage Michael's sacrifice had left behind. They believed he was dead. They had buried him, or at least the idea of him, carrying forward with the grief that settles over those who survive when heroes do not. Sarah raised Michael's son, named him after his father, taught him about the brilliant man who had given everything so others could live in peace. Lincoln tried to find normalcy, though normalcy seemed like a language he had forgotten how to speak. And then a photograph surfaced from Yemen, a blurred image captured by accident, showing prisoners in Ogidjia, a facility controlled by ISIL terrorists in one of the most dangerous regions on earth. In that photograph, barely visible, was a face that should not exist, a face they had mourned, a face belonging to a dead man. Michael Schofield was alive. The revelation detonated like a bomb through the careful equilibrium Lincoln and Sarah had constructed. Grief transformed instantly into furious hope mixed with disbelief. How? Why? What conspiracy had faked Michael's death and imprisoned him in Yemen? The questions multiplied faster than answers could emerge, but one truth became immediately clear. If Michael was alive and imprisoned, they had to extract him, regardless of cost or danger. Consider for a moment what it means to discover that death was a lie. The human mind struggles with resurrection, with the impossible made manifest. Lincoln and Sarah had processed Michael's loss, had moved through the stages of grief, had reached something resembling acceptance. Now all of that emotional work was invalidated, replaced by urgent need to understand and act. But understanding would have to wait. Action demanded immediacy. The geopolitical situation in Yemen was catastrophically complex. The country had fractured into competing factions, government forces, Houthi rebels, Al-Qaeda affiliates, and ISIL militants, all fighting for control of territory and resources. Ogidjia existed in an ISIL-controlled zone, a black site where international law meant nothing, and Western prisoners became propaganda tools or execution victims. Extracting anyone from such a facility would require military-grade planning and extraordinary risk tolerance. Lincoln and Sarah were not soldiers. They were not intelligence operatives. They were desperate people who had survived impossible situations through determination and improvisation. But those qualities alone seemed inadequate for what they contemplated. Infiltrating a war zone, locating Michael in a terrorist-controlled prison, executing an escape, and surviving the journey back to safety. Each element was individually unlikely, and combined they approached impossibility. But Lincoln had never been deterred by impossibility. He had been on death row for a crime he did not commit and survived. He had been hunted across America by forces that should have destroyed him and endured. Impossibility was not a reason to quit. It was merely the starting condition for planning. The intelligence-gathering phase required connections Lincoln had maintained with former allies and enemies who had scattered after the company's destruction. Some had entered witness protection. Others had rebuilt criminal careers. A few had found legitimate work in security or investigation. Lincoln contacted them all, calling in favors, offering money, leveraging shared history to extract information about Ogidjia and its vulnerabilities. What emerged was not encouraging. Ogidjia was designed to be inescapable, run by ISIL with brutal efficiency. Prisoners who attempted escape were executed publicly. Guards were fanatical, motivated by ideology rather than money, which made bribery ineffective. The facility's location in contested territory meant that approaching it required navigating multiple military checkpoints and hostile populations. Even if they succeeded in breaking Michael out, escape routes were limited and heavily monitored. The mission required recruitment of specialists. Lincoln assembled a team that combined former military personnel with criminals whose skills included infiltration, combat, and survival in hostile environments. These were not people motivated by justice or friendship. They worked for money, substantial amounts that Lincoln secured through channels best left unexamined. The team's loyalty extended exactly as far as their payment, which meant Lincoln had to maintain control through a combination of leadership and the implicit threat of what would happen if they betrayed him. C-Note: Michael's former Fox River ally, who had rebuilt his life and now worked in security consultation, joined willingly. His military intelligence background provided planning expertise the operation desperately needed. More importantly, C-Note owed Michael his life several times over and would not refuse a request to repay that debt. His presence added both capability and moral weight to what might otherwise have been purely mercenary expedition. Sheba, a former Mossad operative with experience in Middle Eastern extractions, provided tactical knowledge of the region. She knew Yemen's terrain, understood tribal dynamics, and had contacts among various factions that could provide limited assistance. Her price was high, but her expertise was invaluable. She brought with her a network of local assets, guides, informants, smugglers, whose cooperation would be essential to navigating Yemen's chaos. The cover story for entering Yemen required sophistication. They could not simply arrive as American civilians that would attract immediate attention and probable kidnapping. Instead, they posed as humanitarian workers with a medical NGO, carrying credentials that were technically legitimate though obtained through questionable means. The cover provided reason for their presence and limited protection under international law, though in reality law meant little in the territories they would traverse. Obtaining intelligence about Michael's specific situation in Ojibwa proved extraordinarily difficult. ISIL did not publish prisoner manifests or allow inspections. Information about who was held where emerged through rumor, intercepted communications, and reports from released prisoners. What they learned was disturbing. Michael was imprisoned under the identity Kaniel Autis, a name that meant nothing to them. He was treated not as a regular prisoner but as a strategic asset, kept in isolation and subjected to enhanced interrogation. The name change suggested intentional identity concealment. Someone had placed Michael in Ojibwa under false identity, which raised agonizing questions about whether his imprisonment was part of a larger operation and whether Michael himself was complicit or victim. Lincoln struggled with this uncertainty. Was his brother a prisoner in need of rescue, or an operative conducting a mission that Lincoln might be compromising by intervening? Sarah insisted that regardless of circumstances, Michael would want rescue if rescue was possible. She needed to believe that Michael had not chosen abandonment, that his 7-year absence was imprisonment rather than deception. But doubt gnawed at her certainty. If Michael was alive and not in contact, it meant either he could not reach them or he had chosen not to. Both possibilities were painful, but in different ways. The infiltration into Yemen occurred through Aden, a port city that maintained some semblance of governmental control. From there, the team traveled north toward ISIL territory, passing through checkpoints with forged documentation and bribed officials. Each checkpoint represented a moment where everything could collapse: a suspicious guard, a database check that revealed inconsistencies, a random search that exposed hidden weapons. They survived through a combination of preparation and luck, that indefinable factor that separates success from failure in operations with minimal margin for error. The humanitarian cover provided just enough legitimacy to avoid deep scrutiny. The bribes provided just enough incentive for guards to look away from minor discrepancies. And the team's professionalism suggested they were what they claimed to be: people with legitimate purpose rather than infiltrators planning terrorist prison extraction. Approaching Ojibwa required reconnaissance that exposed them to catastrophic risk. They could not simply assault the facility; it was too well defended, and any attack would result in prisoner executions before rescue could succeed. Instead, they had to identify Michael's exact location within the facility, determine guard rotations and security protocols, and find vulnerabilities that could be exploited without triggering general alarm. Sheba's local contacts provided crucial intelligence. One contact, a former guard who had fled ISIL after witnessing atrocities he could not stomach, provided facility layouts and details about security procedures. Another contact, a smuggler who delivered supplies to Ogygia, agreed to include their team members in a delivery convoy, providing access to the facility's exterior under legitimate pretext. The infiltration plan was audacious. During a supply delivery, team members would split from the convoy, breach the facility's perimeter at a weak point the former guard had identified, locate Michael, and extract him during a planned diversion that would draw guards away from his cell block. The timing window was measured in minutes. Any delay, any unexpected obstacle, and the operation would fail catastrophically. Lincoln struggled with the knowledge that if the plan failed, Michael would likely be executed immediately as punishment and deterrent. The risk of making Michael's situation worse weighed heavily against the necessity of attempting rescue, but doing nothing meant abandoning Michael to indefinite imprisonment in conditions that amounted to torture. The calculation was brutal. Attempt rescue and possibly cause Michael's death, or abandon him to living death. There was no good choice, only the least terrible option. The night of the extraction arrived with the particular tension that precedes life or death action. The team moved into position, nerves controlled through training and professionalism, but present nonetheless. Lincoln felt the familiar sensation of pre-operation focus, the narrowing of attention to immediate objectives, while larger fears and hopes were compartmentalized for later processing. The supply convoy approached Ogyggia's gates as the sun set, creating long shadows that provided additional concealment. The team members concealed in the convoy remained motionless as guards inspected the trucks with flashlights and mirrors, checking for hidden compartments or unauthorized passengers. The inspection was thorough but routine, and routines create predictability. The guards found nothing because they looked where they expected to find problems, missing what was hidden with greater sophistication. Once inside the facility's perimeter, the team split as planned. Some remained with the convoy to maintain the cover story. Others slipped away during unloading, moving through shadows toward the blessed building where intelligence suggested Michael was held. The facility's security relied heavily on exterior defenses, walls, guards, observation towers with less sophisticated internal security. This was both advantage and liability. Once inside, movement was easier, but if discovered, escape would be nearly impossible. Lincoln moved through Ogyggia's corridors with C-Note, following the former guard's directions toward the isolation cells. The facility was grimmer than prisons Lincoln had experienced. Concrete walls showed bloodstains. Cells contained prisoners in conditions that violated every standard of humane treatment. The ideology that ran this place saw prisoners not as criminals to be reformed, but as enemies to be broken or destroyed. It was Fox River's brutality multiplied by fundamentalist certainty. They found Michael's cell, and the man inside was simultaneously recognizable and transformed. 7 years had aged him beyond time's normal passage. He was thinner, harder, marked by violence and deprivation. But more disturbing than physical changes was his reaction to seeing Lincoln. There was no recognition, no joy or relief, only wariness and confusion. Michael did not know who Lincoln was. The revelation was crushing. Lincoln had prepared for many possibilities that Michael would be injured, traumatized, angry about the delay in rescue. But he had not prepared for this, that Michael would look at him with the blank incomprehension of someone encountering a stranger. The implications cascaded through Lincoln's mind. Memory loss from injury or torture, psychological breakdown from isolation, deliberate conditioning to erase his previous identity. There was no time to process the emotional impact. Guards were moving toward their position, alerted by the diversion, but not yet aware of the actual breach. Lincoln and C-Note forced Michael to come with them, overriding his protests and confusion with physical compulsion. Michael fought them initially, not understanding that he was being rescued rather than moved to different imprisonment or execution. The extraction became a running battle through Ojijia's corridors. The diversion had drawn many guards away, but those who remained fought with fanatical determination. The team exchanged gunfire while moving toward the breach point where escape waited. Prisoners in cells shouted and screamed, some in support, others alerting guards, all contributing to chaos that both helped and hindered the escape. They emerged from the facility into night air, heavy with smoke from the diversion fires. The getaway vehicles waited at the perimeter, engines running, drivers ready to depart the instant the team arrived. The run across open ground toward those vehicles was longest seconds of Lincoln's life. Every step expecting bullets, every breath potentially his last. They made it. Guards pursued, but could not catch them before the vehicles disappeared into Yemen's night, navigating without lights along routes prepared in advance. The escape route took them through territory held by different factions, each requiring different approaches to pass through safely. Some accepted bribes, others were sympathetic to harming ISIL. A few simply did not care enough to interfere with people passing through their territory. The journey to the coast took days of careful movement, hiding during daylight, traveling when darkness provided concealment. Michael remained disoriented, not hostile but not trusting, unable to reconcile what Lincoln and Sarah told him with the identity he believed he possessed. He kept asking why they had taken him, what they wanted, where they were taking him. Each question reminded Lincoln of what had been stolen from his brother. Sarah's reunion with Michael on the boat that would carry them out of Yemen was heartbreaking. She held him while he looked at her with polite confusion, unable to remember her face or their love, or the child they had created together. She spoke to him about their history, about Fox River and the company, and everything they had survived together. And he listened as one listens to stories about strangers. The return to America was not triumphant. They had rescued Michael physically but discovered he was lost in ways rescue could not address. The questions that had driven them, how was he alive, why was he imprisoned, what conspiracy had stolen him, remained unanswered because Michael himself could not answer them. The identity of Kani El-Outis was all he knew, and that identity's history was murky at best. Slowly, through weeks of safety and support, fragments of memory began to return. Michael remembered faces without names, places without context, emotions without understanding their source. The recovery was not linear some days. He seemed to remember everything. Other days he was lost again in confusion. But gradually, the man they had known began to re-emerge from the stranger Ojijia had created. The final piece of the puzzle was Poseidon, a company operative who had survived the organization's dismantling and sought revenge. Poseidon had orchestrated Michael's fake death and imprisonment, using him as an unwilling assassin through manipulation and memory suppression. The revelation that Michael had been used to kill people while believing he was someone else added another layer of trauma to injuries already catastrophic. The confrontation with Poseidon was inevitable and brutal. Michael, memories restored, faced the man who had stolen 7 years of his life and forced him to commit murders he never would have chosen. The justice they extracted was not legal. No court would ever prosecute Poseidon because his crimes were too entangled with classified operations. But it was final. With Poseidon dead and Michael's memory restored, they could finally attempt to rebuild what had been destroyed. Michael met his son, now 7 years old, a child who had grown up knowing his father only through stories. The relationship would take time to develop, trust to earn, but it was possible in ways it had not been, while Michael remained imprisoned or lost in amnesia. Lincoln looked at his brother, restored but changed, and understood that some victories are also defeats. They had won. Michael was alive and free. The conspiracy was destroyed. But the cost of that victory, 7 years of Michael's life, the innocence of the child who had grown up fatherless, the trauma that would mark them all permanently, that cost was staggering. And yet, they were together. They were free. The walls that had contained them, literal and metaphorical, were finally, truly breached. The game that had consumed so many years was over, or so they hoped, having learned that hoping for endings is dangerous when conspiracies are involved. In the natural world, certain organisms become fossils, their forms preserved in stone for millions of years, allowing future generations to study what once lived and thrived. Television shows, in their way, become cultural fossils, artifacts that reveal the values, anxieties, and creative ambitions of the era that produced them. Prison Break, across its original 4 seasons, its revival, and its ongoing presence in the streaming age, has become such an artifact. But unlike static fossils, this show has demonstrated remarkable ability to resurrect itself, to evolve with changing media landscapes, to remain relevant long after conventional wisdom suggested it should have faded into nostalgia. Consider what it means for a television show to end and then return. The original Prison Break concluded in May of 2009, its 4th season finale providing closure to Michael's story with his apparent death. For many shows, that would have been the end, a complete narrative arc, fans mourning but accepting the conclusion, the series entering the permanent archive of completed works. But television is an industry before it is an art form, and industries operate according to economic logic that sometimes supersedes creative completion. Fox Network's decision to cancel Prison Break after 4 seasons was not about quality but about mathematics. The show's ratings had declined from its peak, the production costs remained high, and the network needed to allocate resources to new properties that might recapture the surprise success Prison Break had achieved in 2005. It was business, strategic resource allocation that happens constantly in an industry where every hour of programming represents investment that must generate return. But the calculus of value changed in the years following cancellation. Prison Break did not disappear from cultural consciousness the way most cancelled shows do. It found new life through streaming platforms, particularly Netflix, where international audiences discovered it and binged it with the enthusiasm of original viewers. The show that had been a broadcast network hit became a global streaming phenomenon, introducing Michael Scofield's story to millions who had never seen it during original broadcast. The streaming era transformed how television value is calculated. In the broadcast model, value derives from live viewership, translating to advertising revenue during specific time slots. A show that cannot deliver sufficient audience at scheduled times is worthless, regardless of its quality or long-term appeal. But streaming introduced different economics. Value derives from catalog depth, from having content that attracts and retains subscribers over time. A show that consistently draws viewers to the platform, even years after production, becomes valuable in ways that broadcast economics could not capture. Prison Break's value in the streaming marketplace was substantial. It had 4 complete seasons, providing the extended narrative that binge-watching audiences preferred. It had high-concept premise and serialized structure that encouraged continued viewing. It had international appeal, performing well in markets across Europe, Latin America, and Asia. And it had unresolved elements. Michael's death was narratively complete but emotionally unsatisfying, leaving fans wishing for alternative outcomes. Fox executives recognized this value and began considering revival possibilities. The decision was not primarily creative, we have more story to tell, but strategic. There is untapped value in this intellectual property that we could monetize through revival. This distinction matters. Artistic revivals occur because creators feel stories remain incomplete. Strategic revivals occur because corporations recognize profit potential. Prison Break's return was strategic calculation disguised as creative resurrection. The negotiations were complex, involving not just network commitment but cast availability and willingness. Wentworth Miller and Dominic Purcell had moved on to other projects, most notably their roles in the DC television universe on Legends of Tomorrow. Convincing them to return required financial incentives and creative assurances that the revival would honor the original rather than diminish it. Other cast members had scattered across the industry, some still acting, others retired, all with their own considerations about returning to roles they had left years earlier. Paul Shoring, the original creator who had moved on to other projects after the show's initial run, was brought back to oversee the revival. His involvement provided creative legitimacy that pure network cash grab would have lacked. Shoring could credibly claim that he had always envisioned the possibility of Michael's survival, that the original death could be recontextualized as something other than death. This retconning required narrative gymnastics, but audiences who wanted Michael back were willing to accept considerable implausibility in exchange for his return. The announcement of Prison Break's revival in January of 2016 generated enormous response. Social media erupted with fan excitement. Streaming viewership of original seasons spiked as people refreshed their memories, and entertainment media covered the announcement as significant news. This validated Fox's strategic calculation. There was demonstrable audience appetite for more Prison Break, sufficient to justify production investment. The fifth season, subtitled Resurrection, premiered in April of 2017, 8 years after the original series finale. It consisted of 9 episodes, a limited run designed to tell a complete story rather than open-ended continuation. This structural choice reflected lessons learned from other revivals. Audiences want resolution more than perpetual extension. The season revealed that Michael had faked his death to protect his family from company remnants, been imprisoned in Yemen, and lost his memory through conspiracy and trauma. The revival's critical reception was mixed. Some critics praised the return to Prison Break's essential formula, impossible escape from brutal incarceration, conspiracy elements, character dynamics that had made the original compelling. Others argued that the revival was unnecessary, that Michael's death had provided meaningful closure that Resurrection undermined. The debate reflected broader questions about television revivals. When is return justified by creative necessity versus strategic opportunism? But critical reception and audience reception often diverge. And for Prison Break's revival, audience response was enthusiastically positive. The 9 episodes averaged over 4 million viewers per episode in the United States alone, with international viewership significantly expanding those numbers. More importantly, the revival drove substantial increases in streaming viewership of original seasons, creating value beyond the new episodes themselves. People who had never watched Prison Break discovered it through revival publicity, while former fans revisited old episodes before consuming new ones. The franchise value of Prison Break extended beyond the series itself into multiple revenue streams. The complete series DVD and Blu-ray sets sold consistently over years, generating ongoing income from physical media even as streaming became dominant. Digital purchase and rental options provided additional revenue. International distribution rights, sold territory by territory, created income from markets where the show remained popular long after American broadcast ended. Merchandising, while not as extensive as some franchises, provided another revenue stream. Michael's tattoo became iconic, spawned countless replicas and temporary tattoo products. Fox River Penitentiary merchandise, T-shirts, posters, replica prison uniforms sold to dedicated fans. The show's distinctive visual style and memorable quotes became meme-worthy in the social media age, providing free marketing that kept the show culturally relevant. The influence Prison Break exerted on subsequent television cannot be overstated. It demonstrated that broadcast networks could succeed with heavily serialized narratives that required viewers to watch every episode in sequence. This seems obvious in the streaming era, but in 2005, conventional wisdom held that procedural formats with episodic resolution were safer investments. Prison Break's success challenged that wisdom, helping to create space for shows like Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, and countless others that demanded sustained viewer commitment. The show's international impact was particularly significant. In countries where American television dominated imported entertainment, Prison Break became a cultural phenomenon that transcended typical foreign show reception. In China, the show achieved extraordinary popularity, with Michael Scofield becoming a widely recognized character, even among people who did not typically watch American television. This international success influenced how networks and studios thought about content with global appeal, emphasizing universal themes of loyalty, injustice, and resistance to authority that resonated across cultural boundaries. The evolution of television distribution models worked in Prison Break's favor. When the show originally aired, international audiences often waited months or years for episodes to arrive in their markets, creating opportunities for piracy and reducing legitimate revenue. By the time of the revival, global simultaneous release had become standard practice, allowing Fox to monetize international interest immediately. The show that had been partially undermined by piracy during original broadcast became a demonstration of how proper global distribution could maximize legitimate viewing and revenue. Fan engagement strategies evolved alongside the show. During original broadcast, fan communities formed on message boards and early social media platforms, discussing episodes and theories without official network participation. By the revival, sophisticated social media campaigns involved cast members directly, with behind-the-scenes content, live tweeting during episodes, and interactive elements that made viewing feel like communal experience. This engagement created loyalty that translated to viewership and word-of-mouth marketing that no paid advertising could replicate. The question of when to end a franchise is perhaps the most crucial strategic decision creators and networks face. Continue too long and quality degrades, tarnishing legacy and reducing long-term value. End too soon and potential revenue is abandoned, leaving fans unsatisfied and missing opportunities for proper closure. Prison Break has navigated this tension through its episodic resurrection model, ending, returning for limited runs, ending again, which allows the franchise to remain dormant until strategic opportunity for revival emerges. The show's legacy in the prison drama subgenre is secure. It did not invent the prison story; those date back to Count of Monte Cristo and beyond. But it revolutionized how prison narratives could function on television, demonstrating that incarceration could be not just setting but engine for elaborate plotting, strategic thinking, and moral complexity. Subsequent prison shows, from Orange is the New Black to Wentworth, exist in the space Prison Break carved out, even as they explore very different themes and tones. The character of Michael Scofield achieved iconic status that few television protagonists reach. His combination of intellect, desperation, and moral purpose created a hero archetype that has been endlessly imitated. The tattooed escape plan became one of television's most memorable conceits, a visual representation of planning and sacrifice that communicated character without dialogue. Wentworth Miller's performance gave Michael depth that elevated him beyond clever protagonist to tragic figure whose intelligence was both gift and curse. The show's treatment of institutional corruption and systemic injustice resonated with audiences across political spectrums. Conservatives appreciated the portrayal of government agencies as potential threats to freedom. Liberals recognized the critique of criminal justice system failures and execution of innocent people. The show's politics were never simple or didactic, allowing diverse audiences to find their own meanings in the narrative. This ideological flexibility contributed to broad appeal that transcended typical demographic targeting. Prison Break's economic model for future productions offers lessons about sustainable, serialized storytelling. The original plan, one season, one escape, complete story was economically risky but creatively sound. The extension beyond that original plan, while commercially successful, introduced narrative challenges that arguably diminished overall quality. The revival model limited returns for specific stories rather than open-ended continuation represents compromise between creative closure and commercial opportunity. The franchise's future remains uncertain in productive ways. The fifth season ended with hope rather than finality, leaving possibility for additional returns without demanding them. Cast members have expressed willingness to revisit the characters if appropriate opportunities arise. Fox retains rights and strategic interest in the property, but there is also recognition that the story has been told, that Michael's journey has reached satisfying conclusion, and that further extension might diminish rather than enhance the legacy. In the landscape of 21st century television, Prison Break occupies unique territory. It was bridge between broadcast network dominance and streaming revolution. It demonstrated international appeal before global distribution became standard. It proved serialized drama could succeed on networks that had relied on procedural formats. It created iconic characters and moments that remain culturally relevant years after original broadcast. And it pioneered the resurrection model that has become increasingly common as networks and studios mine their archives for proven properties with remaining value. The strategic success of Prison Break ultimately derives from something beyond mere calculation. It told a story people cared about. Michael's love for Lincoln, his willingness to sacrifice everything for family, the moral complexity of his choices, the intelligence and courage he demonstrated. These elements resonated emotionally in ways that demographics and ratings and business models cannot fully predict or explain. The show worked because at its core, beneath the conspiracy theories and elaborate escapes and violent confrontations, it was about human connection and the lengths people will go to protect those they love. This is perhaps the final lesson for creators and executives contemplating revivals, extensions. Strategic value derives from emotional investment. Audiences return to franchises not because networks will them to, but because characters and stories have claimed permanent residence in their imaginations. Prison Break earned that residence through 4 seasons of increasingly complicated narrative, lost it through absence, and reclaimed it through revival that honored what made the original special, while acknowledging that time had passed and stories had evolved. The walls that contain Michael Scofield across multiple prisons and countries have become metaphors for the constraints all people face: systemic injustice, institutional corruption, circumstances that seem impossible to escape. His repeated success at breaching those walls offers hope that intelligence, determination, and love can overcome even overwhelming obstacles. This hopeful message, delivered through darkness and violence and moral compromise, explains why audiences continue to return to Prison Break years after the story concluded. In the end, Prison Break's greatest escape was from its own premise. A show about breaking out of prison transcended that limitation to become exploration of freedom, justice, loyalty, and sacrifice. It broke out of the prison of its own concept to achieve something larger and more enduring. The franchise may return again someday, or it may not. The strategic calculations that drive such decisions are ongoing, responsive to changing market conditions and creative opportunities. But regardless of whether new episodes are ever produced, Prison Break has secured its legacy. It changed television, influenced countless subsequent shows, created characters that will be remembered and discussed for decades, and proved that audiences hunger for stories that respect their intelligence and reward their emotional investment. The blueprint for success that Paul Shoring presented to Fox executives in 2004 has been validated repeatedly through original broadcast success, international popularity, streaming renaissance, and successful revival. But the ultimate validation is simpler and more profound. People still watch, still care, still feel the urgency of Michael's impossible missions and the depth of his sacrifices. The story of Prison Break, the show and the phenomenon, is complete. But stories, like the best escapes, leave doors open. And somewhere in the future, perhaps another impossible situation will require another impossible plan. Another brilliant mind willing to tattoo a blueprint across his body and walk into hell to save someone he loves. Until then, the walls stand empty. The cells are silent, and the legend remains, preserved not in stone like ancient fossils, but in digital formats that allow each new generation to discover what happens when one man decides that no prison, literal or metaphorical, is truly inescapable. The game is over. The escape is complete. Freedom, finally, has been achieved. Or has it? With Prison Break, certainty is always provisional, endings are always negotiable, and resurrection is always possible when the strategic moment arrives.